like me who aren't particularly intelligent, but who work hard, and hard work, I think generally gets you through.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I understand. And I think when it comes to, getting into international law, and most times people only think that we have international human rights law, but there are other aspects to it. I think everyone is like human rights, and I think that's like the face of international law. But I'm sure you've managed to take part in other aspects of it. Can you briefly tell us those aspects?
Me?
Yeah.
Is that question for me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
No, I mean,
Yes.
I in fact, international human rights law is the one. I mean, I've worked a lot on international human rights law, but I've been saying I've worked on just about every aspect of international law. I've worked on international criminal law, both from an academic perspective and from a practitioner's perspective. I've worked on peace and security law, again, both from a practical perspective and from an academic perspective. I worked on law of the sea. In fact, at the moment, I'm counsel for 2 states in an advisory opinion proceedings before the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. So yeah, I mean, there's very few areas. I guess the only area of law that I haven't really worked on is IHL. And I avoid it in part because I've got Marti, but I avoid it as much as I can. I probably shouldn't avoid it too much longer, but it's probably the only area. And even there, even though I haven't worked on it, I've had enough PhD students that have done work on IHL, that I'm not completely daft when it comes to the basic principle.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, and I think we have to go to Professor Bradley now because she's like our IHL expert. So Professor Bradley, like how can us aspiring academics, prepare ourselves for like a career in international law, especially during law school and postgrad studies? And now that I think about it, there aren't really many student associations dealing with international law like at undergrad. So like, how can we prepare ourselves? Over to you, Professor Bradley.
Yes, so that is a very good question. I must say that I remember in my final year, to be honest, when I went to university, I really wanted to study acting, and my mom told me that is not going to be permitted, or journalism, and then she also said that's not going to be permitted. So then I studied law, and I wasn't as stimulated, but in my final year, way back then, international law was a final year subject. I remember coming out of, I didn't have a driver's license then yet, so my poor mom had to wait for me. And I told her, oh my goodness, I'm going to be a professor of international law. And she thought, really? So at least now this is what you're going to do. And then I first went to UCT, of course. But what I can tell you in terms of advice is that the first step really is education, because to become an academic, you do need that master's degree. And I'm a big proponent, of course, with work masters if you can, to have the sources down, and then your PhD, because that really is your driver's license as an academic. But for me, as Dire also said, it's really hard work. I was not the #1 law student, unfortunately, at UP in my final year. I can tell you that, but I did get that international prize. I followed my passion, and if you're passionate about something, it will never feel as if you are working. So it really takes hard work and routine, really being dedicated, and to really focus on your first do your LLB degree well, get that 65% so that you can get into an excellent LLM program. And the LLM program will guide you as to what is that niche that you will be able to follow for your career. Good advice is, I always knew I wanted to do IHL, but there wasn't IHL LLMs back in the day. But then in my PhD, I think it is worthwhile to choose that one question, something that makes your heart beat faster, or, and something that you can make a career of, to explore a field really in depth. Of course, you can also be a generalist. IHL is very specific, in terms of weapons and things. So if you want to pursue something like IHL, I think it really takes time. You have to upskill yourself, and you can never stop reading. I can tell you that Prof. Tladi and Prof. Tladi is my senior, he's still reading. I can tell you that we both work crazy hours. It's not only when you see us in the classroom, but if you have commitment, a little bit of luck, And if you can join, if you can get those marks and you have a brilliant idea and you can join an NRF research chair, that will create community. I know both at Prof. Tladi's chair and Prof. Stratrom's chair, UP and UJ, and there really is mentorships programs for those postgraduate students. So if you have the community and support and routine, you can make a successful career out of it. But it's a really competitive field, so work hard to get the postgraduate studies right. Unfortunately, that is not a negotiable. Thank you so much.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, that is like the big thing. And fortunately for me, I just completed my master's. And yeah, after that, I'm past that stage. But there is another elephant in the room after that, and that is publishing. So like everyone's like, you have to publish, you have to do this. And unfortunately, I wasn't doing any writing in my undergrad. So like my next question is like, what are the opportunities for research and publication in international law academia? And I think, like I really need to get into publishing now. I was late because I was like, oh no, I don't need to write. But then I had to do like a 40,000 word dissertation. So now I have to, do those things. So
can give you a little bit of advice, and I know Prof. Tladi will jump in because he also gave me very good advice. I must say that, I only started my LLM again at 28 years old, and I think I published one out of the LLM, but if you have a research master's, you can milk the quality chapters for quality publications. I'm not someone that count, I know there's certain requirements to a year, but I wouldn't rush publications just to tick those publications off. I think if you can play the long game and publish the best quality work that you have, and don't aim too low. My second publications was in the Netherlands Yearbook of International Law. And if my supervisor didn't kind of force me, I would not have tried to submit there. I think you get solid feedback if you get rejected. It's just to submit and to get others to read your work. My mentor, Prof. Tladi, he co-published my first ever publication with me back when I was in the final year of my master's. He took that chance. So having a mentor to guide you at least on your first publication is helpful. But for me, I only really started publishing after my LLD during my postdoc. And I can tell you that I became between lecturer and associate professor only took me 3 years. I skipped a level, but I delivered a quality doctorate, and then I could actually use the content of the quality doctorate. So my advice is focus on quality during your LLM, your LLD, and then you will be able, because it's a paradigm, it's a skill set, learn the art of writing and you will catch up. Of course, you can also publish during the journey, but I do think that if you do a solid doctorate, that you can publish from there. And I have caught up. So that is some advice that I can give. Dire might have a different view, but for me, it works.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prof. Tladi. Your take on.
Yeah. And I guess this maybe goes back to the first point I made, that, different strokes for different folks. There's really no wrong way to do things. I started publishing quite early. So so I think even before I had my LLM, I had published one piece. And then when I did my LLM, on the basis of the work that I did during the LLM, I wrote 2 pieces, right? So I had already 3 articles when I started my PhD. When I was working on my PhD, so I did it kind of the other way around. One, my PhD was published as a book, in part because it was a requirement at the university where I was, that the PhD must be published. In fact, they call the PhD, they call it the book. But while I was working on the PhD, so, with PhDs, there were many things that I had worked on, many chapters that didn't make the final PhD. And those chapters, while I was working on the PhD, were simply converted into articles. Also, as soon as I identified, and this was quite early on in my research, as soon as I identified what the main contribution I was going to make was going to be, I wrote 1 article on that. So if you ask me, what is your thesis about? I want to read what your thesis is about, not all the research that you've done. what's your main argument? I can point you to one article that I've written, and it basically describes, and it was written quite early on in the thesis, so the main idea was already there, and that's the way I did it. I mean, I started early. Also, Marty is right. We shouldn't put so much emphasis on quantity, but you're also in a competitive space. And one way to achieve both quantity and quality is when I write, I think of an idea and I write about it pretty quickly, and I have a set idea, and you get feedback. You get feedback.
Okay.
You get feedback even after the thing has been published. You yourself read it and you think, maybe not, maybe this could be refined. And that's an opportunity to sort of refine that idea. And now the process of refining itself produces more pieces. And so there's different ways that you can do it, I think. But the bottom line is, if you want to be an academic, you have to write. If you want to write, you have to like writing. You can't write if you don't like writing. I mean, you can't write academic pieces if you don't like writing. I spent 8 years away from academia. In that 8-year period when nobody expected me to write. In fact, if anything, my employer didn't like the fact that I was writing, because you can imagine it can create some conflict if you're writing about government policy and you're working for government. But in that period, I wrote as much as a full professor is expected to write, even though I wasn't working and nobody expected me to write. Why? Because I simply like writing. I mean, writing is if you ask, I mean, writing is the thing that gets me going, that gets my juices going. So I think I think that there's different ways of doing things. And you just have to think about what is it that makes you comfortable. There are people that can multitask. If you can multitask, then write while you're writing your thesis. If you can't, focus on finishing the thesis, because ultimately you have to finish the thesis. Right? The thesis is, as Marty says, that's your driver's license. In South African universities, you need that thesis. So I think it's important to finish it. So whatever you do, be aware that you have to finish your thesis. Even if you're going to write in the process, just remember the main thing is your PhD. If you're working on a PhD.
If I can just add to what Dire has said, I think that you really have to love research, because you will be doing it 24/7, and luckily we both love research. But commanding research and being able to write is so important, because for me, that is my number one as an academic. Because if I do good research, I teach better, because I really grapple and understand how to communicate my research. If I do good research, I'm a better supervisor. If I do good research, my community service is at a better level, and I'm at a better level for society. So I really do think that research should be the priority, and it will, flow into the other aspects of academic life.
Okay, great. So
I think we're losing Davitso. Davitso, your sound's a bit, we can't quite hear you.
Am I still audible?
Yes, slightly.
Now you are.
Yeah, now you are.
And then we jinxed you, so now you're not.
She did say she might have load shedding, so I don't know if that's causing any problems.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hand over to Boho. I'm sure you have some questions as well while Davitso gets her sound back on track.
Yes, Ms. Leah, thank you so much for the opportunity. And yes, I have a few questions for both Professor Dire Tladi and Associate Professor Martha Bradley. So I'll be asking 2 questions. So the first question is, what are the key skills and qualifications that are required to excel as an international law professor? So we'll start with Prof. Tladi, and just to find out, like, are there any, unique skills that you need, to excel as an international law professor? And then also, what qualifications do you need to be able to excel? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll see if I can touch on both. So in terms of the particular qualifications, I think that's simple. If you're going to be a professor, the very first basic thing that you need is a PhD. It is possible to be a professor, by the way, without a PhD, but it's rare. You can do it at American universities, but even there, you'd have to have gone to particular universities. So, you have to go to Harvard, Yale, or so whatever the case may be. But it's from, as a general rule, you need to have a PhD. There are exceptions everywhere, of course, but there's a general rule you have to have. So that's your first qualification. Your second qualification is you need to have written, like you need to have published, you need to have made what we say is a contribution to the field. When we say you're a professor, we say that you can profess, you can tell us something that we don't know. So those are the most basic requirements. I mean, the requirements of writing and what you must have written differ from university to universities. Some have quantitative requirements, which are very difficult. So, and others have quantitative requirements, which are very problematic, right? So, but at least they're objective, and so nobody can say, that the university misapplied them or whatever, because it's simple. If you've written, the requirement is you must have written 20. If you haven't written 20, you haven't written 20. Although I must be honest, in my experience, we also have very creative ways of counting. It must be a lawyer thing. But anyway, so that's the basic qualification. In terms of particular skills that you need to excel, look, you need to write, and so you need to be able to write, which means you need to be able to communicate. You need to be a hard worker, as I said, because you need to read a lot, and reading can get tiresome. You also have to have a very good analytical brain. So you don't have to be, really, really smart, but you have to be able to analyze things and be able to adopt a critical approach, particularly if you want to be an academic. I mean, if you want to be an international lawyer that does practice, then perhaps the critical mindset is not that important. But if you want to be an academic in international law, it's important that you have a critical mindset. These are, I think, the basic skills that you need. A couple of other skills that perhaps are not necessary, but they are useful. And most of us don't have them. I mean, I don't have the one that I'm going to tell you now, and that's language skills. It's good to be able to speak more than English, and I'm not talking about, my own language, Tswana here. I'm talking about sort of Spanish, French, Chinese, Arabic, the so-called UN languages, I guess. Although on this point, I think it is, maybe the young people here, when, can start a movement for introducing some African languages with also sort of, requirements that must be, but there has to be a movement. I mean, the reality is that right now, if you're asking me the question about right now to excel, what do you need? And I think those are the sort of skills that I think you need. So Marty, I don't know if you've got any other that you can add.
I think just in terms of skills, because you painted the picture perfectly in terms of what you need to become an academic. I just want to echo hardworking. In a sense, you also really have to have tenacity, sometimes thick skin, because you do get feedback and then you have to get up. So to actually develop the skill to, bounce back, to accept feedback and to do better. I think that kind of tenacity really, really is needed. Also, yes, you have to be analytical. You have to have that kind of mind that, if I may say, becomes obsessive about a legal question, about a word, about sources, because you have to really have that deep thinking about something, and you have to have a little bit of patience, because sometimes it does take time. So that would be what I say the skills are.
All right, thank you so much. One last question. So, and I've also been victim to this. you know, we, like most people, we think that, you know, being an academic, it's like mostly limited to, you know, being in a lecture or teaching, you understand? But this specific question is, you know, just to allow both of you to actually explain or give us a clear picture of what you do in academia besides being lecturers. So the question is, how does one strike a balance between teaching, research, and other academic duties?
I think Marty is probably the most qualified person to answer that question.
So I will, since, you know, I also at this moment still teach undergrad and master's students. I think that it is a very important part, education and teaching and imparting knowledge. For me, it is a priority. I love teaching and learning also but I link it with reading philosophy and academic articles on teaching and learning to upskill myself. So you can see the researcher is already there. But to have, I think, a full career and the type of career that we all strive for, which is essentially Dire's career, you know, to give back, to be in the international level, it is through grounding yourself in your research. It really took me, well, I think it's rather quick, but it took me about 5 years after my PhD to really see that I now have somewhat of an international presence, so that I can say that, yes, I am teaching at San Remo. Yes, I am involved in training soldiers. Yes, I am involved at working with the ICRC to really get that community engagement level, and also to engage with certain things that NGOs or so forth work on. But all of that, I firmly believe, is because of the quality of my research output. And that didn't happen immediately. It is persistent, you know, work, and then having wonderful mentors who, like Prof. Tladi, gave me an opportunity or nominated me to advise a bit on the AU cyber statement. And Prof. Weber, my former master supervisor, gave me the opportunity to be on a group that works on space traffic management. And for being the loudest in the San Remo course 3 years ago, got me a position now as a teaching assistant there, and from sharing my work. So I really do think that if you're strong in research, and then it will flow into teaching excellence. And by reading, people will hear that, you know, you also have to be kind. I think that I haven't said this perhaps before as one of the skills that you have to have, but I can tell you there's a lot of IHR lawyers that's much smarter than me, and perhaps have also been in armed conflict and so forth. But I do get sometimes wonderful opportunities because I think, if I may say this, I'm easy to work with and I am kind. So I think being easy to work with, you have to balance and stay humble. And that's something I can say about Dire. You know, he is what one can call a super professor, but I haven't ever met a kinder guy. And I think that is something important as well. So if you can do research and you can stay humble and you can play well with others, and you want others to excel as well, you don't become overly competitive. I think that's something that's also important as an academic, and I will give the floor back to you now, but I've never competed with anyone except Marty. I'm very competitive with myself because I have my own experiences, my own education, you know, my own opportunities that I've had, and I have my own capacity. So I keep pushing myself because I have great examples, and that also does that. But through doing that and through helping where you can, I think that is really be kind, work hard, and with a little bit of luck and a little bit of NRF funding, it will indeed work out. So, and with wonderful mentors, that gives you opportunities. My mentors, my PhD supervisor, others have given me opportunities, and then Dire and I would pay it forward. We try to also then give others the opportunities that we've had. So be kind, pay it forward, work hard.
Wow. Thank you so much, Prof. Bradley. And I think we have time for one last question. Yes.
We've got some,
So,
I think we'll post some of the questions from the group chat, because I know both Professor Tladi and Professor Bradley need to run on the dot at 3 p.m. So I think we'll go through
Yes.
some of the questions of the group chat. I'll kick us off and then you guys can take it further. But here's a question from one of the audience members that's very interested in international environmental law and would like to know what if she should do an internship, which internships can she get involved in, and yeah. If, I don't know, maybe Professor Tladi with a little bit of experience in environmental law.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's a very specific question. It's about environmental law. So one thing that I think you can do already at the very beginning is make yourself available domestically. I mean, I noticed that you are talking. I think that you're talking about internships abroad. At least, I think that's a sense that I got. But make yourself available also domestically. So that's the first thing that I would say. Secondly, there are many internships abroad. The problem is, I mean, the great difficulties, a lot of them are unpaid. So it's not that difficult to get them. It's easy. Well, it's not easy. I shouldn't say it's easy, but it's possible to get them. The main difficulty is that they're unpaid. And if you're a South African, you know, with so parents who are earning in rands and you have to now be in Geneva, it's very expensive, right? So that makes it really difficult. One thing that I think does give some opportunities, Marty mentioned this in one of our answers, is involvement in research shares, because research shares have a significant amount of money, which money is supposed to be used for the students mainly, right? So mainly it's supposed to be used for the students. So for example, at the moment I have two students. One has just come back from Geneva, and the other one is in The Hague and is coming back over the weekend. And these aren't, in fact, I had one also in May that went to do an internship also in Geneva. So I think, you know, if you can get yourself funding from a research chair or from the NRF through a freestanding bursary, I think there are ways around it. But the key difficulty with international internships is financing for them. Finally, it's important, you know, we spoke about, I think it was Marty that mentioned luck. You know, I mean, I've been very lucky. I think I've put in a lot of hard work, but a lot of it there's also been a lot of luck. The beauty about luck though is when the luck comes your way, are you ready? Are you prepared? And that's why it's important to make sure that the opportunities that you get, including opportunities that might have nothing to do with international environmental law, that you work really hard so that when an opening comes up and you put in your application, they should be able to say, wow. I want to give you guys a story. I don't know if it's a story or a hint. I get a lot messages from students from India saying, dear Prof. Tladi, we would like to work with you for free. Just give us work. Now initially I just, you know, I couldn't respond to all of these but I took a chance and I took one on, and she has been amazing. She's worked so hard. And then I took another one on. These are students that are saying, we want to work for you for free. Give us that opportunity. Now, the other one has just got accepted into Harvard, and the other one has just got accepted into Leiden. And part of it is because they put themselves in a position where their CVs look amazing for people their ages. Why? Because they've worked on a book with Professor Tladi, they've worked on ILC stuff. But we in this country generally don't have a culture of saying, let me just do this to improve myself. Question is always, are you going to pay me? And I, you know, it's not always possible to pay. So then the thing is, I can't use you. And so, yeah, I think that's just something to be aware of. It's a cultural thing, I guess, but I think it's an important point to make.
I'm actually just going to jump in there. I have to attest to that. Working for free has gotten me all my opportunities. Well, you know, especially moving to the United States, immigrating, that whole process, being able, because it builds a CV, but it also builds a network. and it also builds experience. So I know it's frustrating, but not being paid for your work, but it pays off in the long term. Absolutely.
And if I may jump in there, actually,
Mhm.
so on that point, Clea has been working with me and her real boss in Miami on a case, and the idea was that she was going to work for free. I mean, the truth is that we were also going to work for free, but now it turns out we won't. Right? It's a so sometimes you sign up to work for free, and then money comes. So I also always try to tell my kids, don't chase money. If you don't chase money, somehow it'll come to you.
Mhm.
That's true.
And just to add on to that, when we do a community engagement like teaching at San Remo or engaging with the ICRC, that is free. But that is the kind of service that you do as an academic. And not only does it push, of course, your stature, but that is where you get your best ideas, because you're of service, but you hear from people on the ground what is actually going on. So as Dire said, sometimes, you have to eat, of course, but chasing money is not going to make you an excellent academic. Chasing knowledge and experiences is what is going to make you an excellent academic.
Great. The next question, I think we can quickly answer this one, is that do you have to be admitted as an attorney to succeed in academia and IHL?
I have not done my articles. I can also tell you that the legal advisors at the ICRC, many of them have not done their articles. If you want to work at DIRCO, you need to do your articles. You can ask Prof. Tladi about that. But in terms of IHL, or you can also be an admitted advocate, I think. But in terms of IHL, what you need is at least a master's degree in IHL to be competitive to get into the ICRC. Vaughan, I think, is on the school, Vaughan Rousseau, one of UP's graduates and my UJ LLD student, and with his excellent master's degree, got appointed at the ICRC South African branch. For IHL, it's important so that you understand the practical side of IHL. So you have to do the IHL LLM that you can do either at UP or at UJ. And you have to then pursue a PhD to be internationally competitive, but really doing those service courses at San Remo or doing the ICRC or Africa task, that is what you should focus on, because there you mix with soldiers. So you hear what is the need on the ground, and you learn how all these weapons and things work that you won't know about if you haven't been to conflict zones and so forth. So really just hard work and writing on things that is practical. Look at the 2022 12 challenges report. Look at the ICRC other challenges reports that they flag areas of practical significance for operators, and focus your research there so that you can also work in practice through advice. So that would be my advice. It worked out for me. So with a little bit of luck and a lot of commitment. So you do not need articles or to be admitted to be an IHL lawyer. If you want to work, for example, for the SANDF and become a military lawyer, then that is a different story.
Good. Okay. We had an interesting question here about working in terms of, the geopolitical contexts that are currently ongoing in international law and South Africa. And Prof. Tladi knows a lot about this. In terms of South Africa and Russia and Putin and the ICC and, the BRICS summit coming up, how does one navigate that, especially as an early career academic? I think we'll start with that.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a very difficult question for me. I think it's an important question, and here I guess I'm often discouraged by my colleagues. I would hope that academics would not just simply follow the narrative and honestly think about legal principles and think about how legal principles apply. We tend to, in this country, and I don't want to just speak about these particular situations, but I think we tend to follow narratives. There's a particular narrative that's out there, and it doesn't matter who generates the narrative. And because there's a narrative out there, academics feel it necessary to sort of jump on the bandwagon. We have to do our own independent analysis, and it's okay to be different. It's okay to come out with a different analysis. What irks me sometimes is I see people writing things, and particularly in the popular media, and then you have a conversation with this person and say, well, okay, so I heard you said this, just explain a little bit, and then you realize that they haven't really thought about it. And because they haven't thought about it, it tells me that they're just simply following narratives. They're saying this because that's what they heard on 702, or they heard, I don't know, but so my advice to you as far as that's concerned is your job as an academic is to be above the fray and to look at what's happening objectively. And sometimes in terms of law and legal, law is not perfect, right? And sometimes I think as international lawyers, we have to own the fact that law is not perfect. And sometimes law, the proper application of law, does not produce desired results. Your function then is not to sort of twist the law, bend it so much so that it becomes unrecognizable in order to achieve you can say the law in this particular aspect is flawed, but admit that the proper application of law leads to a conclusion that you might not like. And I think that ought to be okay. So that would be my response to this. I'm sure there's more that I could have said, because you've also given examples about the US.
If I can add in with that, it's exactly what Prof. Tladi said. I always tell my students, please just read the treaty. We get people who write in, Daily Maverick, etc., who only reads other people's voices. But check the sources for yourself. That is your toolkit. Interpret the actual law and then come to an honest interpretation. Politics should not lead your answer. The law should lead your answer, even if it is flawed. So I absolutely agree with Prof. Tladi on that. That's part of the integrity as an academic, not to twist the law.
Great, thank you. Yes, I think that staying above the fray is such an important mantra to really live by as an academic, because we have a lot of bandwagon academics and legal professionals in general, especially, to answer the US question, at least. I live in the United States. It's a different discussion. You attend American Society on international law events, and it's a different context, a different discussion. It's not necessarily taught differently. There's just different perspectives, which is healthy. But yeah, staying above the fray. I think we should all write that somewhere and stick it on a wall. Good. I've got a question here, and I think this is the last one we have time for today. And this was sent to me by someone who would not like to make their name public. But they would just like to know, in terms of, if you've applied for a lot of PhDs and received a lot of rejections, does that just mean you're not cut out for academia? Is it just because the industry is so competitive? So what are your options there? In terms of rejections for PhD positions, or just rejection in general? How do you handle that?
So so it's interesting. I wasn't rejected, but it took a year and some to get a response. There was a reason, but it took a year and some to get a response. And at some point I thought, all right, I have to start looking elsewhere. But no, I don't think you should give up. You must remember that a rejection is not necessarily a rejection of you. So I have a lot of people who write to me wanting to do a PhD with me, and I quite love the topic. But at the moment, for example, I've got 15 PhD students. It's kind of hard, even under normal circumstances. The university encourages, for example, no more than 3 or 4, and I've got 15. So you can imagine that some good topics will come my way that I will say, I'd like to take it, but I can't take it. There may be reasons like that. There may be reasons like you've applied at the university and, for example, because people like Marty have left us, we don't have if you, for example, were to apply to the University of Pretoria to do IHL, it's likely you're going to get rejected, even if the project is really, really good, if you apply at the moment. But maybe there's going to come a time when we are going to appoint somebody who sort of really likes IHL, or you just look somewhere else with this. So my advice, though, to you would be the following. I speak to the person, find a supervisor in mind, and write to them first, have a conversation with them. You know, it's easier to reject a file that just comes anonymously, and I look at it and I think, yeah, that's interesting, but I've got 15 students, and I write no. It's harder if you've spoken to me, and you know, in that conversation, I get a sense that this is something you really want to do, and that you're somebody that I'd really like to work with. So it's also useful to speak to the person you want first. Plus, then it doesn't feel like a rejection. If you write to me and I say, you know, I'd really like to take you, but I just don't have space, and here's the constraint, then it doesn't feel like a rejection. It becomes easier to go to the next person, and the next person, and the next person, and so on, without feeling like you've been rejected, because there's no formal rejection.
I agree. Sometimes it's just an issue of capacity. I mean, both Dire and I'm quite full, you know, then you perhaps don't know the rejection. So I would really email and set up a Zoom and meet the supervisor or the expert I want to. I think it does not make sense, but students don't know this, just to blindly apply for an LLD at a university. You don't know the experts. You don't know if they have capacity right now. They can guide you as to what topics has, you know, a need for another contribution, because you might be the 6th applicant who writes about Al-Bashir, exactly. And that's been done a million times. So I would really reach out. I mean, both myself and Prof. Tladi, we really want to speak to our students and meet them and guide you. So reach out, don't be discouraged. Sometimes it's just timing, and it really helps to have that conversation.
Great. Thank you so much. This was, I think we'll start wrapping it up now, so that I promised to end at 3. So I think we'll make it. But thank you so much to both Professor Bradley and Professor Tladi for your time, and very, very insightful comments. And we're very grateful. And I don't know if Davidzo and Tebogo want to say something to end it off, and then we'll end it there.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
No, I would just only like to thank Prof. Bradley and Prof. Tladi for making it for this webinar. And, you know, the information was just enriching. And then I believe everyone that joined the webinar now has like a clear picture of what's really needed to become a successful academic, you know. And yeah, like I'm just happy that you joined the webinar. And I would also like to thank the audience for joining us and being part of this webinar. Yes.
May I, in my capacity as president of SABILA, just first of all thank you guys for all the hard work you put. You know, SABILA has been a kind of a dormant organization, and it's not, I have to take responsibility for that. It's also been under my presidency, and it's really has been with the youth that we see, you know, SABILA doing things. So I just really want to thank you. And then of course, thank you for everybody for joining and supporting this very important initiative. There will be more, so please stay tuned. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Keep an eye out for an email about future webinar events and any other events that we hold. And if you're not a member of SABILA, please send an email to, it was on the invite, the Zoom invite that you received, send an email to that email address, and yeah, we can get you in contact how to join. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.